I absolutely agree with you about the fact that most people just can't afford to lose their job. And so the idea of fashioning some strategy in which you can, you can potentially endure an encounter with the buzzsaw doesn't make any sense, because if there's a 10% chance of going into the buzzsaw and it's going to cost you your ability to keep a roof over your family's head, it's a non-option. But, right. But nonetheless, so here's the model. The ancient piece of kit here is about what I call cultivated insecurity. So cultivated insecurity is the idea that whatever the origin, I don't know that anybody formulated this as a plan. However it came into being, though, there is a control mechanism that involves a huge amount that stands between you and destitution actually coming down to a very narrow set of relationships. So, for example, for most people, their ability to pay their mortgage, their health care, their retirement, their ability to continue on in the world is tied to the relationship with an employer. It's even worse if it's a career, and even worse if it's a career where you can't easily move, right? Where, as we, found in academia, it wasn't like a professor at one place could just simply decide they'd had enough of their employer. They could tell their employer off and go get a job somewhere else. That's not how academia works. Mm-hmm. So what this means is that your insecurity causes you always to be thinking about, well, can I afford to say what I think? And in general, people don't do it. So their insecurity is cultivated because it keeps them docile where they might know more. And I would point out, just in passing, the number of conversations a week that I now have with very intelligent people, many of them well positioned in the world, who express the inability to say certain things that they believe out loud in public, is amazing. Right? It is stunning how much people are self-editing because they have fears, almost no matter how secure they are. So something about the insecurity has gotten out of control. And the point is, if you recognize that this cultivated insecurity is a means, it functions as a means of keeping people from saying dangerous, true things, then the solution is to cultivate their security, right? If you want to see more people doing something courageous and standing up against things that are threatening to us, cultivate their security in one way or another, which is in part actually what our audience does for us.
Yes, very much so.
But, and what they did from the beginning, right? I think in part people stood up to defend us and to keep us going because they were just thrilled to have somebody saying what they couldn't. Right? Yeah. So that's an important part of the puzzle. Is this model about buzzsaws isn't necessarily about you standing up and, fighting if you're in too much danger, but it's about somehow us collectively figuring out who is in a position to do that, right? Who's secure enough to survive a close encounter with the buzzsaw.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I was thinking as you were talking about cultivated insecurity is that the old thing that used to happen, and I don't know my history well enough to add any detail, but the idea of a company store where people live all in one place, and maybe the housing is supplied by the company, and there's literally only one place to get the things that you need, and maybe you even pay in scrip, and you don't ever, you pay in the same means that you get your salary from the company for. They have control over everything about your existence, and of course you have cultivated insecurity, and of course it's not serfdom, but it is. It's a form of that. And this isn't company store. This is like populist store, or I don't quite have the analogy, but the censorship that we're creating, the buzzsaw that you're talking about, is creating a kind of cultivated insecurity in the same domain, financial, potentially, for a lot of people, social and financial, the same way that the company stores of old cultivated insecurity financially and socially for people.
It's a personhood choke point. The degree to which, for example, it's the flip side of something wonderful, right? The fact that Google provides you the tools to, put out a shingle and start a podcast on whatever topic you want and to start to earn from it if people show up in any significant numbers, right? That's a great thing. But the degree to which it gives Google veto power over whether you continue to show up in the world in the way that you're pioneering is shocking, right? How the hell can it be that you can actually, carve out some innovative new, interaction with some audience? You can find them, they can decide they like your content, and Google can suddenly one day decide, well, we don't. And, suddenly you go back to square one, right?
Right.
That's a very dangerous, and I do like your analogy. It is very close to company store, right? They make it really easy in some ways, just as a company town in which you're being paid and you're paying, and the point is you just never escape it, right? It's a whirlpool. But the other thing I wanted to point to is a kind of battle that I've gotten into repeatedly with people in our circle. So I'm frequently approached, as you probably are, by people who are faced with some kind of what they see as analogous to what we've faced. And they ask what they should do. Right? What should I do?
It's heartbreaking.
And I know what they want to hear, right? They want to hear, okay, here's what you do. Here's how you survive it. But definitely be bold, stare them down, right? Do that thing. I have always felt that I cannot in good conscience give that advice, right? Because for one thing, I don't know how many people did what you and I did who we've never heard of because they were successfully, effectively silenced, right? And they didn't find a way to make a living. So I don't want to give people advice that gets them harmed, right? When I'm in no position to even calibrate how dangerous the action is, right?
Or how many people depend on them for their current situation.
Right. Yeah. So in my sense, and what I try to tell them, which is, I think I'm now convinced not the right thing to say, but too complex and not useful, is look.
But you're going to say it here anyway.
Well, I'm going to reveal that this is the advice I've given and that I've changed my position on whether it's the right advice. The advice is, look, you've got to figure out whether or not you can afford to have the confrontation and whether you've got the right kinds of characteristics to endure what's going to come back at you, because it's very, very ugly. And if you take it personally, it can really chew you up. But if you do, then, I can say a little bit about what I would pay attention to and how I would plot a course.
So it surprises me that you are rethinking that. That seems like that's an invested response, and it's a caring response, and it's true. It's
the right response for the individual. What it is, and I feel weird about this, but several people have convinced me that in some sense, the thing to do is to advise people to be bold, despite the costs. And I do think that in some sense, you wouldn't ask if you weren't looking for something to embolden you.
Well, and you led here by saying you know what they want to hear. And so you've been resisting telling them what they want to hear. And what you're saying now is, actually, I should be telling them, if they're coming to me in the first place, and I think I get fewer of these than you do, but I do hear from people. And what you're saying is, no, actually, you're looking for someone to sort of say, yes, do that thing. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, do that thing.
Right. And in fact, if we look back at, at the Evergreen situation, we had a large number. It wasn't the majority of faculty, but there were a large number of faculty who knew better than what happened to the place, who didn't stand up. And the point is, they didn't do themselves any favor. It's not like they actually preserved their well-being.
Yeah. If 20 to 40% of the faculty who knew what was going on was wrong and destructive had actually stood up en masse.
Yeah, they could have done something about it. And as it happens, they're just, the place is hemorrhaging and they're trapped, right? So anyway, I think there's something to be said for an argument that pays attention to both the individual's well-being and the fact that the individual has a short and a long-term predicament, and that the
but then, so isn't that argument then find reinforcements before you stand up?
Well, always, except it was amazing how hard that was to do. In the Evergreen situation. One of the things that I think was different here in the lab leak situation was that there were people with different, in many cases, non-overlapping skill sets who all found themselves. I mean, in fact, I think almost everybody who ended up in drastic or otherwise confronting the fiction of obvious natural origin, they all had the same kind of encounter with the central fact, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, that it's a fundamentally different thing, because there are facts, whether or not they will all ever be known, right? As opposed to just sort of random slanderous claims about, and easily falsifiable claims. In the case of Evergreen, it's the most racist institution ever. Like, do we have any evidence at all? No. Okay. Right. Whereas you had scientists doing the work, which is not, we are scientists who came in this sort of hybrid role of communicating between, in this interstitial space between like doing the science, which is not what we were doing. We were interpreting the science, and speaking as journalists should have been, but for the vast majority of them, we're not doing. And the fact is that, as you said, the Drastic Group and Uri Dagan and many and others were staunch. They knew what they saw.
They knew what they saw, and again, I think I'm the only person saying this out loud, but the fact, and this goes right to your point about there were facts in the case of the lab leak. Mm-hmm. There were facts, and by saying this is a hypothesis, one defined the terms, the rules of engagement. They defined the milieu and the standard by which things are judged, and it was scientific, which meant that people couldn't, pull all of these, crazy illegal things on you because you had defined it. You said, look, it's a scientific question, and here, let's show how that piece of evidence actually, does or doesn't fit.